The beeping of the EKG machine was the only sound that kept me company. A sterile rhythmic pulse that was both a comfort and a cruel reminder of my isolation. I lay in this hospital bed, the crisp white sheets a stark contrast to the grey haze of my consciousness, and I waited. I waited for a hand to hold mine, for a voice to whisper a word of comfort, for a familiar face to appear in the doorway. But the doorway remained a cold, empty rectangle of light. My chest felt like a cavern of shattered glass, each breath a new shard of pain. They called it a mild heart attack, a warning shot fired by my body, but to me, it felt like the final judgment. It was the moment my life, or what was left of it, had been laid bare for the world to see. And the world, my world, had decided to look away. It had been 6 hours since the ambulance brought me in. 6 hours since the paramedics had fought to keep me conscious on the gurney, their faces a blur of urgency and concern. They had been strangers, but they had shown me more care in those few minutes than I had received in years. I had given them my wife's number and my son's. I had mumbled their names through a haze of pain and fear. Marie, Patrick, Michael. The names felt like ghosts on my tongue, echoes of a life I once knew. I remember the chaos of the emergency room, the controlled frenzy of doctors and nurses, the needle in my arm, the cold gel on my chest, the stern, reassuring voice of a doctor saying, "You're going to be okay, Mr. Donovan. You're going to be okay." But as the pain subsided and the world came into sharper focus, a different kind of pain began to set in. A pain that had nothing to do with my heart, a pain of absence. I had tried to call them myself, but my hands were shaking too much to hold the phone. A nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, had offered to help. "Do you want me to call someone for you, sir?" she had asked, her voice soft. I had nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "My wife, Marie," I had managed to say, "and my sons, Patrick and Michael." She had dialed the number for me. I could hear the faint ringing on the other end, the electronic promise of connection. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then the automated voice of the answering machine. "You've reached the home of the Donovans. We can't come to the phone right now. Please leave a message." My heart, the one that had just tried to kill me, sank deeper into the well of my chest. The nurse looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. "Would you like to try another number?" she asked. "Maybe one of your sons?" I had given her Patrick's number. It went straight to voicemail. I gave her Michael's. Same result. That was 4 hours ago. Since then, the only person who had visited was a social worker, a nice young woman named Ms. Evans, who had come to discuss my discharge plan. She had assumed, like everyone else, that I had a family waiting for me. "Do you have someone who can pick you up, Mr. Donovan?" she had asked, her voice professional and kind. I had simply shaken my head. She hadn't pressed, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken truth hanging in the air. Lying here, a prisoner of this bed and my own thoughts, I replayed the last few years of my life. It was a highlight reel of a man slowly becoming a ghost in his own home. The quiet dinners where the only sound was the clinking of silverware. The holidays spent with my sons on their phones, their lives lived on screens, a world away from the man who had worked so hard to give them everything. The growing chasm between Marie and me, a silent war fought with passive-aggressive remarks and sighs that were louder than screams. I had always been the provider, the rock, the patriarch. Or so I thought. I had worked 2 jobs for years to put my boys through college, to give Marie the comfortable life she deserved. I had bought the big house in the suburbs, the new cars, the vacations to Disney World. I'd given them everything but myself. I had been so focused on providing that I had forgotten to be present. I had traded my time for money, my conversations for paychecks, my presence for presents, and now my heart was a broken thing, and my family was a memory. The guilt was a heavy blanket, a suffocating weight on my chest. I had been so sure I was doing the right thing, building a future for them. But what good was a future without a family in it? What good was a life built on a foundation of unspoken resentment and silent distance? A nurse walked in, checking my IV. "How are you feeling, Mr. Donovan?" she asked, her voice a practiced melody of professional concern. "I'm fine," I lied. It was the easiest thing to say, the most automatic response. But inside I was anything but fine. I was a man who had lost everything, a man whose family had abandoned him at his most vulnerable moment. I was a stranger in my own life, a man whose heart had failed not from cholesterol or stress, but from the unbearable weight of a profound and total solitude. The beeping of the EKG was a cruel metronome, marking the slow, agonizing minutes of my abandonment. I closed my eyes, a single hot tear escaping and tracing a lonely path down my temple. The silence was deafening. I was alone, and I had nobody to blame but myself. The next morning, the sun streamed through the hospital window, casting a stark, uncompromising light on the small room. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled the air, a constant reminder of my predicament. A doctor, a young man with a reassuring smile, came in to deliver the good news. "Your numbers are looking great, Mr. Donovan. We're going to keep you one more night for observation, and then you'll be free to go." "Free to go where?" I muttered, a question that was meant for myself but escaped my lips. The doctor paused, his smile faltering slightly. "Home, of course. We'll give you instructions on diet and exercise. You'll need to make some changes, but you're going to be just fine." I nodded, not bothering to correct him. My home was a house, not a home. It was a mausoleum of broken promises and unspoken words. The thought of going back to the same four walls, the same silent rooms, was more terrifying than the heart attack itself. Ms. Evans, the social worker, came by again. She brought a small, sad-looking plant in a plastic pot, a gesture of corporate kindness that felt as hollow as the silence on my phone. "I just wanted to check in," she said, pulling a chair to the side of my bed. Her voice was gentle, non-judgmental. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse, "for the plant." "It's a peace lily," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "They're very resilient." She was waiting for me to say something, to open up. I could see the professional concern in her eyes, the practiced empathy. But I couldn't bring myself to speak. What was there to say? That I had failed? That I had spent my entire life building a family that wanted nothing to do with me? The words felt too heavy, too shameful to utter. "Mr. Donovan," she said, her voice dropping to a low, compassionate tone. "I know this must be a difficult time. We tried calling your family again this morning. There was no answer. Do you have any other family members? Any friends we could reach out to?" I shook my head, my eyes fixed on the blank television screen mounted on the wall. "No. No one." It was a lie, but it felt like the truth. My brother, Mark, lived across the country, but we hadn't spoken in years after a stupid argument over money. My sister, Sarah, was in Florida, and our relationship had withered to a single Christmas card each year. I had friends once, golfing buddies, co-workers, but the years had taken their toll, and the ties had frayed. I had isolated myself, a slow, deliberate process of putting work and providing above all else. I had built a fortress of material possessions, and I had locked myself inside. Ms. Evans sighed, a quiet, empathetic sound. "It's okay to feel this way, Mr. Donovan. It's not uncommon for families to have—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Strains. But you don't have to go through this alone. We have resources, counseling, support groups." "I don't need a support group," I said, a flicker of my old pride coming to life. "I just need to go home." "Are you sure you're ready to go home on your own?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. "We can arrange for a temporary stay in a rehabilitation center, just to make sure you have the support you need." I shook my head vehemently. No, I'll be fine. I need to get back to normal." But there was no normal to get back to. My normal was the sterile silence of this hospital room, the rhythmic beep of a machine, and the crushing weight of my own neglect. I had been a ghost in my own family's life for so long that they no longer knew I existed. My sons, Patrick and Michael, were grown men now, both in their 20s, both with lives of their own. I had missed their first dates, their heartbreaks, their victories. I had been a bank account, a signature on a college tuition check, a ghost in the background of their family photos. Patrick, the older one, was a corporate lawyer in New York. He had been a serious, driven kid, just like me. But he had a quiet resentment in his eyes that I never could understand. Michael, the younger, was an artist, a free spirit. He had always been more open, more emotional. He was the one who had tried to bridge the gap, who had once asked me, "Dad, why are you always so busy?" I had brushed him off, a dismissive wave of my hand. "I'm busy for you, son, so you don't have to worry about anything." The words now tasted like ash, and Marie, my wife, the woman I had promised to love and cherish. Our love had not died in a flash of anger or a moment of betrayal. It had simply faded, a slow, agonizing process of attrition. We had become roommates, two people sharing a space but not a life. Our conversations were limited to, "Did you pay the electric bill?" or "Are you going to the store?" The intimacy, the laughter, the shared dreams, it was all gone, replaced by a cold, quiet emptiness. I looked at the small peace lily on the table. It was green and vibrant, a testament to its resilience. It had survived being uprooted, repotted, and placed in a strange new environment. It had adapted. I, on the other hand, was wilting. The heart attack was not just a physical event, it was a psychological one. It was the moment my body had called out for help, and the silence that followed was the moment my soul had been shattered. Ms. Evans left shortly after, leaving me with the plant and my thoughts. The beeping of the EKG machine was now a drumbeat of my own profound failure. I was a man who had been given a second chance, but I had no one to share it with. The thought of returning to that empty house, of sitting in that empty living room, was a heavier weight than the one that had settled in my chest. The hospital was a prison, but it was a prison I was in alone, and I realized, with a chilling certainty, that I had been alone for a very, very long time. The discharge from the hospital was a quiet, anticlimactic affair. A nurse handed me a bag of prescriptions, a list of dietary restrictions, and a final compassionate glance. "Take it easy, Mr. Donovan," she said. "No stress." The irony was not lost on me. I took a cab home. The ride was a silent procession through the familiar streets of my town. Each turn of the wheel felt like a step deeper into the past, into the life I had so meticulously built and so utterly neglected. The cab pulled up to the curb and I paid the driver, the transaction impersonal and brief. I stood on the sidewalk, a stranger in front of my own house. The two-story colonial with its manicured lawn and neat flower beds looked exactly the way I had left it. It was a perfect, pristine shell, a monument to my success. I fumbled with my keys, the metal cold and heavy in my shaking hand. I pushed the door open, the sound echoing in the stillness of the afternoon. The house was cold, not just in temperature but in spirit. The air was stale, untouched. There were no dirty dishes in the sink, no mail on the counter, no coats slung over the chairs. It was as if no one had been here for days. Maybe no one had. I walked through the living room, my footsteps on the hardwood floor, a lonely percussion. The family photos on the mantelpiece seemed to stare back at me, their smiling faces, a cruel, mocking caricature of a family that had never truly existed. There was a picture of Marie and me on our wedding day, her young face radiant with hope. Another of my sons as toddlers, their chubby cheeks and bright eyes filled with an innocent trust I had long since betrayed. I ran my hand over the frame, the dust a fine layer on my fingertips. I found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Marie's elegant cursive handwriting. "Gone to my sister's for a few days, don't know when I'll be back. We'll call later." The note was dated yesterday, the day I had the heart attack. No mention of the hospital, no mention of me. Just a cold, detached message. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. She knew, they all knew. The hospital had called, Ms. Evans had confirmed it. They had simply chosen not to come, not out of spite, not out of malice, but out of a profound and total indifference. My existence, or lack thereof, no longer registered in their lives. I sank into a kitchen chair, the plastic bag of medications a crinkling monument to my failed health. I had always been the strong one, the one who never got sick, the one who took care of everyone. I had believed my strength was a virtue, a shield against the world. But now I saw it for what it was, a wall. A wall I had built brick by brick, a wall that had kept me safe and solitary, a wall that now separated me from the very people I had worked so hard for. My cell phone was on the counter, its screen dark. I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I unlocked it. There were no missed calls from Marie, No voicemails from Patrick or Michael, nothing. The silence was a roar. I scrolled through my contact list, my thumb hovering over the names. Marie, Patrick, Michael. I wanted to call them, to demand an explanation. But what was there to explain? The silence was the explanation. It was a quiet, damning verdict. I remembered a conversation I had with Patrick a few years ago. He was home for a holiday, and I had tried to talk to him about his job. He had been quiet, withdrawn. "Dad," he had said, his voice flat, "you don't know me. You don't know what I do, who my friends are. All you know is my bank account. You've never asked me a single personal question in my life." I had been hurt, defensive. "Of course I know you, son. I'm your father. I gave you everything." He had just looked at me, a deep sadness in his eyes. "You gave us things, Dad. You never gave us yourself." The words came back to me now, a haunting echo in the quiet kitchen. He had been right. They had all been right. I had been a provider, but I had never been a father. I had been a husband, but I had never been a partner. I had been a ghost in my own home, a phantom presence whose sole purpose was to sign checks and pay bills. The sun began to set, the light fading in the windows. The house grew darker, the shadows longer. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. The loneliness of the hospital room was a clinical antiseptic thing. The loneliness of my own home was a suffocating, soul-crushing weight. It was a tangible presence, a silent enemy that had been waiting for me to come back. I got up and walked to the refrigerator. It was full of food, a testament to Marie's careful planning, but I had no appetite. My heart felt heavy, a dull ache in my chest. I poured myself a glass of water and went back to the living room, sitting on the couch I had bought with my hard-earned money. I looked at the empty space beside me, the empty space where Marie should have been, where my sons should have been. I was a king in an empty castle, a rich man who had lost everything that mattered. I had survived a heart attack, but I was dying a different kind of death. A slow, silent death of the soul, brought on by the devastating knowledge that I had built my life on a foundation of sand, and now, at the moment of my greatest need, it had all crumbled away. Days bled into a silent, solitary week. The routine was a monotonous, soul-crushing loop. I woke up to the empty side of the bed, the pristine sheets a testament to my wife's absence. I made myself a bland, doctor-approved breakfast, the taste of oatmeal as flat and uninspiring as my days. I took my medications, a handful of pills that were supposed to keep my heart beating, but did little to mend the hollow ache in my soul. I spent my afternoons wandering through the house, a restless ghost in my own home. I cleaned things that didn't need cleaning, straightened photos that were already straight, and stared out the windows at a world that seemed to be moving on without me. I tried to watch television, but the cheerful commercials for new cars and family vacations felt like a personal insult. I tried to read, but the words blurred on the page, my mind replaying the same loop of my past failures. I thought about calling my brother, Mark. I found his number in my phone, the name a relic of a time when we were close. We had been inseparable as kids, two boys with big dreams and a shared sense of humor. But as adults, we had drifted apart. The argument had been stupid, about a small loan I had given him that he had been slow to repay. I had been a rigid, unyielding man, a stickler for what was right and just. I had seen it as a matter of principle. Now I saw it as a moment of profound foolishness. I should have let it go. I should have been a brother first, a businessman second. I held my phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over his name. I wanted to hear his voice, to hear him tell me that it was all going to be okay. But a wave of shame washed over me. What would I say? "Hey Mark, remember that argument from 10 years ago? Yeah, well, I had a heart attack and my family abandoned me, so I was wondering if you could spare a few minutes for your failed brother." No, I couldn't. I was too proud, too broken. The phone went back into my pocket, the unsent message a silent weight on my conscience. The silence was the worst part. It was a tangible presence, a living thing that filled every room, every corner of the house. It was the silence of a phone that didn't ring, the silence of a house that didn't hum with the energy of a family. The only sound was the thud of my own footsteps, the quiet whir of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a car passing by. I went to my home office, a room I had always seen as a sanctuary, a place where I could work and be productive. I sat in the leather chair, my hands resting on the polished mahogany desk. The papers were all in neat piles, the pens in a perfect line. Everything was in order, just as I had left it. But it felt alien, a monument to a life I no longer recognized. I opened a drawer and found an old photo album, the kind with sticky pages and yellowing plastic covers. I flipped through the pages, a journey back in time. There was a picture of a younger Marie, her hair long and dark, her eyes bright with a playful spark. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a moment of pure joy, captured forever. Another picture showed me, my face thinner, younger, holding a tiny Patrick in my arms. I was smiling, a genuine unforced smile that seemed to have been erased by time. I saw a picture of a family vacation to the Grand Canyon. My two boys, both in their teens, standing on the edge of the rim, their arms around each other. Marie was standing beside them, her hand on my back, a silent gesture of love and support. My heart ached, a deep, agonizing pang that had nothing to do with my medical condition. We looked so happy, so whole. What had happened? Where had we gone wrong? The answer was right there in the pictures. I was in every one of them, but I was always at a distance. I was the one holding the camera, the one orchestrating the shot, the one making sure everyone was in the frame. I was a bystander in my own life, a director who had forgotten to act in his own movie. The guilt was a hot, burning fire in my stomach. I had always believed I was doing the right thing. I was a man who provided. I was a father who worked hard to give his sons everything I never had. I had been so proud of my work ethic, my long hours, my sacrifice. But I had sacrificed the wrong things. I had sacrificed moments for money, connection for comfort, a present family for a future they didn't want. I closed the album and put it back in the drawer, the memories too painful to look at. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. I was a man who had everything, and yet I had nothing. I had a beautiful house, a successful career, and a family that had chosen to abandon me at my most vulnerable moment. I had survived a heart attack, but the real test was just beginning. I had to face the man in the mirror and confront the truth of my life. I had to find a way to rebuild, not just my heart, but my soul. The journey was long, and I was on my own. But for the first time in a long time, I was starting to realize that being alone didn't have to mean being a ghost. It meant I had to start living for myself before I could hope to live for anyone else. The next day, a package arrived. It was a small, unassuming cardboard box with my name scrawled on the front. I was so used to seeing bills and junk mail that the sight of a personal package was a jolt. I opened it with a letter opener, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a book. Not a paperback, but a beautifully bound hardcover copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. There was no note, no sender's address, just the book. I flipped through the pages, the paper thick and worn. I had no idea who could have sent it. I had mentioned a few years ago that I was interested in Stoic philosophy, but that was to a colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. Was it a coincidence, or was it a message? I placed the book on my desk, the strange gift, a small, perplexing beacon in the gloom of my life. The next day, another surprise. There was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Ms. Evans, the social worker from the hospital. She was holding a grocery bag. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, her smile warm and genuine, "and I thought you might need some fresh groceries. The hospital dietitian said you need to be eating more fresh fruits and vegetables." I was so taken aback that I could only stammer out a "thank you." She stepped inside, placing the bag on the kitchen counter. The smell of fresh apples and oranges filled the stale air of my kitchen. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a lifeline. "I know I'm not supposed to be doing this," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "But I've been worried about you, Mr. Donovan. The hospital staff, we see a lot of people. But your case, it just stuck with me." I didn't know what to say. I was a man who had always prided himself on his independence, on his ability to handle everything on his own. Now I was receiving charity from a stranger, but it wasn't charity, it was kindness. And it was the first bit of genuine human kindness I had received in a very, very long time. "Thank you, Miss Evans," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," she said simply, "but I wanted to." She wasn't pitying me. She was just a human being reaching out to another. We sat at the kitchen table and talked. For the first time, I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to crumble. I talked about my work, my sons, Marie. I didn't hold back. I told her about the note, the silence, the crushing weight of my loneliness. She listened, her expression one of deep, empathetic understanding. She didn't offer advice or platitudes. She just listened. "You know, Mr. Donovan," she said after a long silence, "it's not uncommon for people to get so caught up in the doing that they forget how to be. You've spent your life providing for your family, but you forgot to provide for yourself. You forgot to be a person, not just a provider." Her words were a simple truth, a mirror held up to my own life. I had been a provider, a protector, a man who built a fortress of comfort and security for his loved ones. But I had been so busy building the fortress that I had forgotten to live inside it. "What do I do now?" I asked, the question escaping my lips before I could stop it. "How do I fix this?" "You don't fix it," she said softly. "You build something new. You start with yourself. You can't give to others what you don't have inside you. You need to find yourself again, Mr. Donovan. You need to find a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning that has nothing to do with work or money or what other people think of you." Her words resonated deep within me, a truth I had been running from for years. I had been living for other people, for a life I thought I was supposed to have, for a version of myself that was a complete stranger to me now, Ms. Evans left a little while later, leaving me with the bag of groceries and a flicker of hope in my heart. The house still felt cold, the silence still loomed, but it was no longer a total void. There was a small, fragile light in the darkness, a promise of a new beginning. I went to my office and picked up the book, Meditations. I opened it to a random page. The words stared back at me, a message from a man who had lived 2,000 years ago, but spoke to me as if he were in the room. "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." The words hit me with the force of a revelation. I had spent my life performing an injury on my family, on myself. I had been a distant, cold, and absent man. I had lived a life of quiet desperation, and I had passed that misery on to those I loved. But I could change. I could be different. I could be unlike the man I had been. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs, a feeling of hope and resolve taking root in my heart. I was a survivor, not just of a heart attack, but of a life lived in silent despair. The first step was to acknowledge the past, to stop running from it. The next step was to face the future, a future I had to build for myself, brick by brick, with kindness, with purpose, with a new understanding of what it meant to be a man, a father, a husband, a person. I was alone, but I was no longer a ghost. I was a man, and I was ready to start living. The days that followed were a gradual, deliberate process of change. I started small. I began taking walks. At first, it was just around the block, a tentative step into the world I had so long ignored. The air was crisp, the sky a cool, indifferent grey. I noticed the neighbours I had lived beside for years but never truly seen. A young couple walking their dog, a woman tending to her garden, an elderly man sitting on his porch, watching the world go by. I started to greet them with a nod, then a tentative, "Hello." They responded with a surprised but friendly smile. It was a small thing, a simple gesture, but it was the first brick in the foundation of my new life. I wasn't just the man who lived in the big house anymore. I was a person, a part of the community. The walks became longer. I found a park a few blocks from my house, a sprawling green space with a walking path that wound through a forest of old oak trees. I walked for hours, the rhythm of my footsteps a calming meditation. I listened to the birdsong, the rustle of the leaves, the distant sound of children's laughter. The world, which had once seemed so far away, was slowly starting to come back into focus. The weather turned. A cold, steady rain began to fall, turning the world 100 shades of grey. I went for my walk anyway. The cold water felt good on my skin, a cleansing, refreshing feeling. I walked for hours, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead, soaking my clothes to the skin. The city, normally so loud and chaotic, was hushed, the rain muffling the sounds of traffic and life. I walked until I was standing in front of a small, unassuming building with a sign that read, Community Center. I had seen it 100 times, but I had never paid it any attention. There was a flyer taped to the door, its ink smudged by the rain. It was an advertisement for a support group, Healing Through Connection, a support group for those in need. I looked at the flyer, the words blurring in the rain. I felt a pang of shame, a flicker of my old pride. I don't need a support group, I thought. I'm fine on my own. But I wasn't. The truth of that statement hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was a man who had been completely and utterly alone for years. The silence of my home, the indifference of my family, the profound and soul-crushing weight of my solitude, it had all brought me here, to this moment, standing in the rain, staring at a flyer. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. I reached out and took a picture of the flyer with my phone, the image a strange, pixelated promise of a future I couldn't yet imagine. I turned and walked back into the rain, the path back to my empty house now feeling less like a prison and more like a journey. When I got home, I was a shivering, dripping mess. I took a hot shower, the water a soothing balm on my skin. I made myself a cup of hot tea and sat in the living room, the quiet of the house no longer feeling like an enemy, but a friend. I opened the Marcus Aurelius book. I found a new passage. Do not be disturbed by what others think of you, for their thoughts are not your own. Your thoughts are your own. The words hit me again, another revelation. I had spent my life living for the approval of others. I had worked 2 jobs, bought the big house, and provided for my family because I wanted them to be proud of me. I wanted to be the hero, the successful man, the one who had it all. But in the process, I had lost myself. I had lived a life that was a reflection of what I thought other people wanted, not what I wanted for myself. The rain beat a steady rhythm on the window pane, a soft drumbeat of change. The loneliness was still there, a low hum in the background, but it was no longer a suffocating silence. It was a space, a quiet moment for me to think, to reflect, to finally listen to the quiet, neglected voice inside me. I pulled out my phone and looked at the picture of the flyer. The support group met on Thursdays. It was Tuesday. I had 2 days to decide. 2 days to confront my pride, my fear, my deep-seated belief that I had to be strong and independent at all times. I was a man who had spent his life building a fortress, and now I was finally considering opening the doors. The thought was terrifying, but for the first time in a very long time it was also exhilarating. I was on a journey, and I was the only one who could take the first step. Thursday arrived, grey and unforgiving. The rain had subsided, but the sky remained a heavy, oppressive blanket. I spent the day trying to convince myself not to go. It's a mistake, a voice in my head whispered. You don't need help. You're not one of those people. I told myself I was a man who stood on his own 2 feet, who didn't air his dirty laundry in public. But the hollow ache in my chest, the profound sense of isolation, was a louder, more compelling argument. At 7 o'clock, I put on my coat and walked out the door. The community center was a little over a mile away, and I decided to walk. The cold air felt like a challenge, the walk a pilgrimage. Each step was a battle against my own fear and pride. I walked past the houses with their warm, welcoming lights, the sounds of families inside a faint, muffled hum. A pang of longing shot through me, a yearning for a life I had never truly lived. I reached the community center. The building was older, with a brick facade and a single well-worn wooden door. I stood on the sidewalk, my hands in my pockets, watching the people go in. There was a young woman, her face etched with a sadness I recognized. An older man, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that went deeper than just fatigue. A couple, holding hands, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. They were all strangers, but they were all like me. They were all walking into this place, this small, unassuming building, seeking something they couldn't find on their own. I took a deep breath, and with a resolve I hadn't felt in years, I pushed the door open and walked inside. The room was small, with a circle of mismatched chairs in the center. There were about 10 people already there, their faces a mixture of apprehension and quiet resignation. Miss Evans was there, sitting in one of the chairs, her smile a warm, welcoming light in the room. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and she gave me a small, encouraging nod. I found an empty chair and sat down, my hands clasped together in my lap. The meeting began. The group leader, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, introduced herself. She had a soft, calming voice that put everyone at ease. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "This is a safe space, a place where we can share our stories, our struggles, our triumphs. There's no pressure to speak. You can just listen if you like. But what's said here stays here. This is a place for healing." She went around the room, asking people to introduce themselves if they felt comfortable. A young woman named Maria talked about her struggle with her son, who had become a stranger to her after a difficult divorce. An older man named Robert talked about the loss of his wife and the crippling loneliness that had followed. A couple, John and Linda, talked about their struggles with a grown daughter who had cut them off from their grandchildren. Their stories were different, but the pain was the same. The pain of loss, of abandonment, of a profound and total loneliness. As each person spoke, I felt a sense of connection I hadn't felt in a very long time. I was no longer a solitary island. I was a part of a community, a group of broken people all trying to find their way back to a sense of wholeness. When it was my turn, I hesitated. My throat felt tight, my voice a trapped thing. Ms. Evans gave me another small nod. I took a deep breath and began to speak. "My name is John," I said, my voice a low, hesitant murmur. "I had a heart attack a few weeks ago. The hospital called my wife and my sons. None of them came, not even my wife." The words came out in a rush, a torrent of pain and shame I had been holding back for weeks. I expected judgment, pity. Instead, I saw a sea of understanding faces. They knew, they understood. I told them about my life, about working 2 jobs, about building the big house, about my pride in being a provider. I talked about how I had become a ghost in my own family, a man who had given them everything but his time and his heart. As I spoke, the dam broke. The shame, the anger, the profound sadness I had been holding back for so long came pouring out. I talked until my throat was raw, my voice hoarse. When I finished, there was a long, comfortable silence. No one said anything. They just sat there, their eyes filled with a quiet, profound understanding. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Thank you for sharing, John. That took a lot of courage." I looked at the faces around the room, the men and women who were strangers, but who felt more like family than the people I had lived with for decades. I had come here a broken, solitary man. I was still broken, but I was no longer alone. The support group wasn't a place for pity. It was a place for healing. It was a place where people who were lost could find their way back to each other and to themselves. I had taken the first step, and in that moment, I realized that my journey was just beginning. It was a long road, full of pain and self-discovery, but for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to walk it. The support group became a weekly pilgrimage, a beacon of hope in the quiet monotony of my days. I learned to listen, to empathize, to see my own pain reflected in the stories of others. I shared more, the words coming easier with each passing week. I talked about my strained relationship with my brother, the coldness with my wife, the deep-seated resentment in my sons. The group, my newfound family, listened without judgment, offering small, quiet gestures of support and encouragement. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, where I had confessed my deepest regrets about not being a better father, I went home feeling a sense of catharsis, but also a raw, exposed vulnerability. The house felt colder than usual, the silence a palpable thing. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the living room, the flickering television screen a distraction from the turmoil in my mind. Suddenly, my phone rang. The sound, so rare in my life, was a jarring, unexpected jolt. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. My heart hammered in my chest, a mix of apprehension and a strange, hesitant hope. I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice a little shaky. "Dad?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, a little rough. It was Michael, my younger son. I was so surprised I couldn't speak. I had been waiting for this call for weeks, but I had never truly believed it would come. My throat tightened and I swallowed hard. "Michael? Son? Is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," he said. There was a long pause, a heavy silence hanging between us. I heard you were in the hospital." The words were so simple, so understated, but they held the weight of weeks of silence, of all the unspoken words between us. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I was. A heart attack. Mild, they said." "I know," he said, his voice dropping. "I heard. From Mom. She told me the day it happened." My heart sank. So they had known. The indifference had been a choice, a deliberate act of abandonment. The anger I had held in check for weeks flared up, a hot, bitter wave in my chest. "She told you? And you didn't call?" The words came out sharper than I intended, laced with a bitterness I couldn't hide. "I didn't know what to say, Dad," he said, his voice filled with a familiar weariness. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, Dad, sorry you're dying, but I'm a little busy right now." The bitterness in his voice was a mirror of my own. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my emotions in check. This was not the time for an argument. This was the time for a conversation, a chance to bridge the chasm I had created. "Michael," I said, my voice softening, "I'm not mad, I'm glad you called. I missed you, son." There was another long silence. I could hear him sigh on the other end of the line. "I missed you too, Dad. But I don't know who you are anymore. You're a stranger. We haven't had a real conversation in years. All we ever talk about is money or work or how much I'm not like you." The words were a direct hit, a painful truth I had been trying to ignore. I had always seen myself as the strong, silent type. Now I saw myself as a man who had built walls so high that his own son couldn't reach him. "You're right," I said, the words a raw, honest confession. "You're right. I was a terrible father. I was so busy trying to give you everything that I forgot to give you the most important thing, myself. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry." The silence on the other end was a heavy, pregnant pause. I could hear him breathing, the sound of fragile lifeline connecting us across the miles. I don't know what to say, Dad," he said, his voice a quiet, hesitant whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive you." The words, though painful, were a gift. He was being honest. He wasn't pretending everything was okay. He was telling me the truth, a truth that was hard to hear, but a truth that was necessary for any kind of reconciliation. "I know," I said, "and you don't have to. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for a chance to talk, a chance to be your father, for real this time." "I don't know, Dad," he said, the hesitation clear in his voice. "I'm scared. I'm scared that you're just going to go back to being you." "I won't," I said, the promise a solemn vow. "I can't. This whole thing, it changed me. I'm a different man now, son. I'm not the same person I was." We talked for a long time after that, the conversation moving from hesitant small talk to a deeper, more honest exchange. He told me about his art, about the girl he was dating, about the dreams and fears that had nothing to do with me. I listened, truly listened, for the first time in years. I asked questions, and I waited for his answers. It was a clumsy, awkward, and painful conversation, but it was real. It was a conversation between a father and a son, two strangers trying to find their way back to each other. When we finally hung up, the silence in the room was no longer a suffocating void. It was a quiet, hopeful space. My heart felt lighter, a fragile, hopeful warmth spreading through my chest. The road to reconciliation was long, and I knew there was no guarantee of success. But for the first time in a very long time, I had a glimmer of hope. I was no longer a ghost in my own family. I was a person, a father, a man who had made a mistake and was now trying to find his way back. A week after my phone call with Michael, my doorbell rang. It was a sound so unfamiliar that I froze for a moment, my heart lurching into my throat. I looked out the window and saw a car I didn't recognize in the driveway. A young man was standing on my porch, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slumped in a familiar posture of apprehension. It was Patrick, my oldest son. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door. He looked different. His hair was shorter, his face a little more gaunt. He had the same serious eyes I remembered, but they were filled with a deep, weary sadness I had never seen before. "Dad," he said, his voice flat, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "Patrick," I said, the name a raw, emotional thing on my tongue. "Come in, please." He walked inside, and the silence that filled the air was heavy, thick with all the unspoken resentments of the past decade. He stood in the living room, a stranger in the house he had grown up in, looking at the familiar furniture, the family photos on the mantelpiece, his face a stone mask of indifference. "I don't have a lot of time," he said, his voice cold and clipped, a businessman on a tight schedule. I just wanted to see for myself that you were okay." The words, though simple, felt like a slap in the face. He hadn't come for me. He had come to check a box, to satisfy a curiosity. I felt a surge of the old, familiar anger. "I'm fine, Patrick, thanks for asking." The bitterness in my voice was a raw, exposed nerve. He sighed, a quiet, tired sound. "What did you expect, Dad? A welcome home party? A parade? You've been gone for years. You were never here, not really. What did you think was going to happen when you needed us?" The truth of his words was a bitter pill to swallow. I had no right to be angry. I had no right to expect anything from them. "You're right," I said, the words a raw confession. "I had no right to expect you to come. I was a terrible father. I was a ghost. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry." He looked at me then, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. The mask of indifference cracked, and I saw a flash of the pain I had inflicted, the hurt I had caused. "I don't know if sorry is enough, Dad," he said, his voice a low, pained whisper. "I spent my entire childhood trying to get you to notice me, to get you to come to my games, my concerts. I was a good son. I got good grades. I went to a good college. I got a good job. I did everything right, and you still never came. You were always too busy, too tired, too gone." The words were a direct hit, a painful truth I had been running from for my entire life. I had always believed I was doing the right thing, providing for them, making a good life for them. But in my blind pursuit of material success, I had starved them of the one thing they truly needed, my presence, my love, my time. "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know, and I'm sorry. I have no excuse. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was so focused on building a future that I destroyed our present. I'm sorry, Patrick. I'm so sorry." He looked at me, a long, searching gaze. I saw a flicker of doubt, a hint of a question in his eyes. He saw the man I was now, not the man I had been. He saw the regret, the pain, the profound sorrow in my eyes. He saw the truth. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad," he said, the words a quiet, gut-wrenching admission. "I just don't know." "I know," I said, a single hot tear tracing a lonely path down my cheek. "And you don't have to. Not right now. I just want you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be a better man, a better father. And I'm not asking for anything in return. I just want you to know that I'm here, for real this time." He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. The silence that followed was no longer cold and oppressive. It was a space, a quiet, hesitant moment of shared understanding. The air between us, which had been so thick with animosity and resentment, was beginning to clear. He stayed for a little while longer, and we talked. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about his life, his job, his friends, his hopes for the future. I listened, truly listened, for the first time in his life. I asked questions, and I waited for his answers. It was a clumsy, awkward, and painful conversation, but it was real. It was the first step on a long, long road to reconciliation. When he finally left, the house felt different. The silence was no longer a crushing void. It was a quiet, hopeful space, a place where two broken people were starting to find their way back to each other. I was still alone, but for the first time in a very long time I didn't feel lonely. I had taken the first step on a long and difficult journey, and I was no longer a ghost in my own family. I was a father, and I was finally starting to live. Months turned into a new life. The weekly support group meetings became a cornerstone of my existence, a place where I could share my struggles and celebrate my small victories. My walks became a daily ritual, a time for quiet contemplation and reflection. I read the book of Marcus Aurelius until the pages were dog-eared and the cover was worn. The words of the ancient philosopher had become a guide, a map to a new life. It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. My relationships with my sons were still fragile, a delicate tapestry of tentative phone calls and short, awkward visits. Michael and I talked every few days, our conversations moving from surface-level chatter to a deeper, more vulnerable exchange. He was still hesitant to open up, but he was trying. He would tell me about his art, his dreams, the small moments of joy in his life. I listened, truly listened for the first time, and I saw a son I had never known. Patrick was a different story. He was still guarded, his emotional walls higher and thicker than his brother's, but he would call once a week, his voice a little less clipped, his questions a little more personal. He would ask about my health, my walks, my new routine. I would ask about his job, his life in the city, the challenges he faced. The chasm between us was still there, a deep scar from a decade of neglect, but it was slowly, gradually, beginning to heal. As for Marie, she had called me a few times. Her voice was cold, distant. She had told me she was not ready to come home, that she needed time. I understood. We had been strangers for so long that a heart attack was not going to magically fix our broken marriage. We had a long road ahead of us, and I knew that reconciliation might not be possible. But for the first time, I wasn't just waiting for her to come home. I was building a new life for myself, a life that was not dependent on her presence or her forgiveness. I was at the community center one Thursday evening, sitting in my usual chair, listening to a young woman talk about her struggle with her father. Her story was a painful echo of my own. I saw the same hurt, the same deep-seated resentment in her eyes that I had seen in my own son's. After she finished, I raised my hand. "My name is John," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I had a heart attack a few months ago, and when I was in the hospital, my family didn't come. My wife, my 2 sons, none of them came. And I was furious. I felt abandoned, betrayed." I paused and I looked at the young woman, my eyes meeting hers. But then I started to think. I started to realize that I had been gone for a very, very long time. I was a ghost in my own family's life. I was so busy building a future for them that I forgot to live in the present. I gave them everything but myself. And when I needed them, when I was at my most vulnerable, I found myself completely, utterly alone. I took a deep breath. And it was my fault. I was the one who built the walls. I was the one who created the distance. The heart attack was not just a medical event. It was a wake-up call. It was a chance to finally face the truth, to stop running from my past, and to start building a new life for myself and for my sons. I talked about the phone calls, the visits, the awkward conversations. I talked about the long, difficult journey to reconciliation. I talked about how I had to learn to forgive myself before I could ask for forgiveness from others. When I finished, the silence in the room was a powerful, emotional thing. The young woman looked at me, her eyes filled with tears, a glimmer of hope in the deep sadness. She nodded, a quiet, grateful gesture. The meeting ended, and as I walked out into the cool night air, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in my entire life. The world was not perfect. My family was not whole. The scars of the past were still there, a constant reminder of my failures. But I was no longer a prisoner of my past. I was a man on a journey, A man who was no longer a ghost. A man who had found his way back home, not just to a house, but to himself. The long road to a full reconciliation with my family was just beginning. There would be more difficult conversations, more moments of pain and doubt. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was a man who had faced his own mortality, who had confronted his deepest failures, and who had found a way to start living. I was a man who was no longer alone, and I was finally ready to face the world. The journey was long, but for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to walk it.